Thank you. I hope you do that when I'm finished as well. So, I have a confession to make. I'm not in HR. I'm a finance guy. Wow. So what is a finance guy like me doing here at an HR conference? I don't think I'm here because I've actually worked in HR. I've been heading up HR in a large European company. I'm here, I don't think that's the reason. I'm here to talk about something that is too important to leave to finance. It's something that you guys need to be on board on, and I think you will understand at the end of my session. That's the one. What I would like to share with you today is first the bad news. Traditional management is broken. We are in deep shit. Fortunately, there are solutions, and I'm going to talk about one solution that is something called beyond budgeting. Might not sound like an HR thing, but as you will understand, later on there's a big doses of people and leadership into this. And then I want to talk about how we are doing this stuff at Statoil. We embarked on a radical change in our performance management process 12 years ago, including kicking out the budget and a lot of other things. And we call our process Ambition to Action. So that's the agenda. This is Statoil in a nutshell. Norwegian energy company, oil and gas, but bigger and bigger in renewable energy. We are quite big on offshore wind, and we are also moving into solar. So, us in a nutshell. When I joined Statoil back in 1984, it's a long time ago, it was a smaller company than what it is today. And most small organizations, they want to grow, they want to become big. And some succeed, but many who succeed discover that we have not only become big, we have also become rigid, bureaucratic, inflexible. We've lost a lot of that agility that we had as a smaller organization. And there is an interesting parallel here to the aging process of man. Because as we get older, we do lose a bit of that agility, flexibility we had as teenagers, at least on the physical side. And I'm starting to get some practical experience here. And when it comes to man, we have no choice, right? That's the way it goes, whether we like it or not. Organizations, however, they have a choice. It is written nowhere, as far as I know, that because you are big, you should be rigid, bureaucratic, and all the things that we don't want to be. So our journey has very much been about trying to find our way back to that agility we had as a smaller organization without losing the benefits of being big. So our big question is, how can we be big and small at the same time? The big question for small organizations wanting to grow should be, how can we grow without ending up in the same misery? That could be one way of explaining what I'm going to talk about today. I want to continue with our leadership principles. And I want to specifically mention the one in the middle, empower people. Our CEO is dead serious about that one. And the process that I will talk about later, Ambition to Action, is a key process in order to make that happen. I'd like to continue with some wise words from some wise people. This is Dee Hock, the founder of Visa. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to complex, intelligent behavior, and the other way around. Then we got good old Peter Drucker. Most of what we call management is about making it difficult for people to do their job. And I would very much agree. Part of the problem is that we are managing too much. Performance management, a label that I don't like, by the way, I'll come back to why. Performance management, if we don't manage, there will be no performance. I don't think that's true, and I will come back to why. Imagine an organization that 100 years ago invented a fantastic machine. Key for the success of this company, fantastic. 50 years ago, this machine started to make some trouble, didn't work that well. And today, this machine is completely broken. It looks like this. You will all understand that that is not a true story, right? In real life, that would never have happened. already 50 years ago, wise people would have gotten together and done something with this. They would have invented something better, because we all love innovation, right? Innovation is great. Innovation is fantastic. We want to be leading edge, we want to be unique, we want to be in the forefront. Wonderful. But that enthusiasm for innovation seems to be limited to technology and product and maybe services innovation. But there is also something called management innovation. Management innovation is about exploring new ways of leading and managing. And that is not great. That is scary. Kicking out the budget, are you crazy? As one example. A consequence of this is that it's very crowded on the left-hand side here. Everybody is into technology and product innovation. All our competitors are heavily into that. Management innovation, on the other hand, is not yet a crowded place because it's scary. But that's good news for brave companies who dare to embrace also this kind of innovation, because you can just get just as much competitive advantage and performance out of management innovation as you can get from technology and product innovation. And I will give you some examples a little bit later. There are companies out there who say we have no competitive advantage whatsoever in our technology, in our products. We find it in our management model, how we lead and manage. So I'm going to talk a lot about that important word, performance. And now I will do it in a slightly different setting than business. I'd like us to move into traffic. Because in traffic, as drivers, we would also like to experience good performance. And my definition of good performance in traffic would be a safe and good flow. I simply hate traffic jams. By the way, I never understood why they call it the rush hour. There is no rush at all. Those cars are standing dead still. But there's so much I don't understand. Anyway, I think traffic authorities want the same, a safe and good flow. And here is something we often meet put up by traffic authorities to create a safe and good flow. And this is a good old-fashioned traffic light. There's no high-tech, no sensors. Who is in control here? Who is managing? Well, the guy who programmed this light is the one who manages, right? Where would that person be as you sit there waiting for the green light? Somewhere else. And which information would this programming be based on? It would be based on some historical data, some trends, maybe some forecasts, but this would not be entirely fresh information as you sit there waiting for the green light. So here we have a management model where the one who is managing is not in the situation, and management decisions are based on somewhat outdated information. But again, the best of intentions, trying to create a safe and good flow. Do we have an alternative to this traffic light? Very different solution, exactly the same purpose. Anyone? The roundabout. Same questions, very different answers. Who is managing here? Who is making decisions? Who is in control? We are, as drivers, based on which information? Fresh, real-time, here and now information. So very different answers. Could be interesting to compare a bit more these two very different ways of managing. So let's do that. And this is one of my many leading questions for you today. Which of these two is normally most efficient? It's the roundabout. It's actually proven. Which is most difficult to drive in? Which takes most competence? It's the roundabout. And going back to our organizations for a minute, everything we are trying to leave behind in Statoil of traditional management is, from a leadership point of view, much easier than what we now are trying to do instead, right? But we can't go for what's easy because it's easy. We have to go for the stuff that's good for performance. And sometimes that is more difficult. Leadership is actually not meant to be easy. Is it relevant to talk about values in this setting of traffic? In Statoil, we have something we call the Statoil book. It's our most important document. It talks about who we are, what we believe in. Everything I will talk about later is in this book. And we talk a lot about values-based management. Very important for us. And the opposite, we could maybe a bit simplified call rules-based management, right? Values-based management, rules-based management. The traffic light is a good example of rules-based management. Red is stop, green is drive. We can always discuss yellow. But beyond that, very simple, rules-based. And if there is a value set, a mindset among people waiting for that green light, which is about me first, I don't care about the rest, that mindset is normally not a big problem in front of that light. But in the roundabout, me first, don't care about the rest, is actually a big problem. Because in the roundabout, we are much more dependent on everybody having this common positive purpose or wish of wanting this to flow well. We have to help each other. We have to interact with people in a very different way than we need to do in front of that light. Two other words that are important here. Trust. Ahead of that light, traffic authorities don't really trust us to make decisions. In the roundabout, they trust us. Transparency is another important word. Ahead of that light, you don't need much transparency. The only thing you need to see, at least in theory, to make a decision is the color of the light, nothing else. In the roundabout, it's very different. Here you have to be able to see everything in order to make the right decision. I mentioned that I don't like the label performance management. A different reason for that, but it is a label that's highly relevant when we talk about the traffic light. That is what authorities are doing, managing performance. I would argue that in the roundabout, they are doing something else. That is not about managing performance. That is about enabling performance. That is about creating conditions for great performance to take place. And this is more than playing with words. These are two very different things. And I would argue that our ability to manage performance in today's business realities, as I will come back to, is quite limited compared to what we like to think. There's a lot of illusion of control in our performance management. But it's not bad news, because there is so much what you can do when it comes to enabling performance. And those words, performance management, does no longer exist in this book. We talk a lot about enabling performance. We talk a lot about developing performance. When finance and HR together has written the chapter Performance Framework in this book. So, let's leave traffic. But one final comment on the roundabout. It is a more self-regulating way of managing, right? Self-regulation is another important word here. And I would argue that in today's realities, organizations need more self-regulating management models. They need it for at least two reasons. The first reason has to do with our business environment. And at Statoil, we talk a lot about something you probably have heard, VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. There's a lot of it today, and if we take that VUCA seriously, it should have implications for how we design our management models, compared to if there's no VUCA out there. And when I joined Statoil in the early 80s, there was much less VUCA out there than what it is today. So it must have implications for our management model. It is a reality we need to reflect on. The other reality we need to reflect on is not external, it's internal, has to do with people. It has to do with asking ourselves an important question: what kind of people do we generally believe we have in our organizations? And for that important discussion, we chose to go back to good old Douglas McGregor, Theory X and Y. These two opposing views on people and what motivates people. And as you know, Theory X, the very negative view on people, a view that most people in an organization is a bunch of potential thieves and crooks, which all must be managed tightly and kept on short leashes, because if not, we know what will happen. They will all run away, do a lot of stupid things, and spend money like drunken sailors. Well, if you read McGregor's book, you know that he was a bit more academic and polite, but I think that's what he meant. Then you have Theory Y, the very much more positive people view, right? The view that beyond the fact that there's a lot of education and competence, that most people actually want to do a good job, want to be involved, want to be listened to, want to be treated as adults. And we don't need so far to agree on where our sympathy lies, X or Y, although I do have a hope. But it should be very easy to agree that if we mainly believe in X, the implications for our management model should be very different compared to if we mainly believe in Y. So, if we combine these two realities, we need to reflect on the world out there, people in the organization. It could look like this. You recognize the two dimensions. And I would argue that traditional management here lies in that lower left-hand corner, with a conscious or unconscious view that the world is still a quiet and plannable place, and that most people is on the X side. If we disagree, then that is not the place to be. Then we need to move up in that upper right-hand corner. And the way to that corner goes through addressing both leadership horizontally and our management processes vertically. And what we need to get out of it is something that's very rigid, it's very detailed, very annual, very rules-based, a lot of micromanagement, centralized command and control. There's a lot of secrecy and a strong belief in sticks and carrots as ways to drive performance. There might have been a time when this was the right thing to do. I'm not arguing that. Maybe some places around, still the right thing to do. But for us in Statoil, that discussion is completely uninteresting. We know that our business environment is up here with a lot of VUCA, and it goes way beyond the uncertainty around energy prices. And we believe that most people is on the Y side. If that wasn't the case, we would have done a very bad job on recruitment if most people in Statoil were on the X side. And if we did a good job on recruitment and they became X people after they joined, that's also something to reflect on. But fortunately, most people in Statoil is on the Y side. Not everybody. Every time I talk about X and Y, the same names and faces are popping up in my head. I can see them right now. Those names and faces belong to colleagues of mine that I actually think I would put more on the left-hand side than the right-hand side. I'm not saying they are crooks, but maybe we need to keep an extra eye on them. And there might be some names and faces popping up in your heads as well now, because these people typically exist in most organizations. But that is not the issue. The issue is, do they represent a minority or a majority? Because if they exist but represent a minority, we cannot base the design of our management models on minorities. If we believe that most people is on the Y side, that must drive the design. And then we need to find other ways of dealing with the guys in the X camp. This is just like in a free society. We are all free citizens, even if there are some criminals among us, right? We don't put everybody in jail because someone has done something wrong. So what do we need to do to get out of this? Address both dimensions. On the leadership side, we need to be more values-based than rules-based. This does not mean that we shouldn't have rules. It simply means that the stronger we are on the value side, the less rules you typically need. We need more autonomy. In this VUCA world, there isn't always time to run 9 floors up to get that decision, because then it can be too late. And with these people on board, it isn't always necessary either, because very often they can make great decisions for themselves. We need more transparency. And this is good news for all the scared managers I have met over the years, who are afraid of leaving this rather comfortable lower left-hand corner because they are afraid of losing something. What are they afraid of losing? Control, right? And that fear is real. I can see it in their eyes. What they maybe don't understand is that a lot of those controls are nothing but illusions of control, but the fear is still real. So here's some good news for scared managers. Transparency can actually be a very effective control mechanism, a social control mechanism. There is a reason why most thieves and crooks prefer to operate at night, because then it's dark. And I'd love to share this nice little story from Roche, Swiss pharmaceutical giant, quite traditionally managed, but they did a very interesting experiment a few years ago around travel cost. In a pilot, they kicked out the travel budget, kicked out travel rules and regulations. What they introduced instead was full transparency. So with a few exceptions, everybody could see everything. If you traveled, to where? Did you fly, sleep, eat, cheap or expensive? Guess what happened with travel cost in the pilot versus travel cost in the rest of the company? Came down through a very simple self-regulating control mechanism. This was about tearing out pages in that rules book instead of doing the opposite. Last but not least, intrinsic motivation. And I don't need to tell you that for knowledge work, you all know that mastery, purpose, autonomy, belonging are much more powerful than individual bonus, as one example. And what do those 3-4 things have in common? It's about leadership. Leadership, I mean, dangling a carrot in front of people, do this and get that, is not leadership. That is abdicating leadership. So you might have understood it's not just budgets I've lost my belief in over the last 20 years, include individual bonus on that list as well. It does a lot of damage. Anyway, at Statoil, we have always tried to be a people-oriented, values-based company from day one. The Statoil book says a lot about it. I'm not saying we're perfect, but it's always been important for us. But along the way, as we were growing, we were adopting more and more management processes that had a different message. Because it doesn't help to have these theory Y leadership visions if we have theory X management processes. And that, I would argue, is the case in a lot of companies. creating poisonous gaps between what we preach and what we practice. So we have tried to change our management processes to better reflect what we mean about and think about people, at the same time as we have tried to change these processes to make them more VUCA robust, to make them more agile. And here are some things that you typically need to do on the process side. Typically, the detailed annual traditional budget needs to go because it represents so much of what you find down in that lower left-hand corner. More specifically, when we are setting targets and goals, we need to think more in relative terms and less in absolute. It doesn't help that we hit the target of 29.2 if peers are doing 30, 35, and vice versa. So we need to think a little bit more like in football. No football team would say that our most important goals for next season is to score 39 goals and get 42 points. Those are budget goals. They don't think like that. They think in terms of league tables. It's all about doing well against peers. We need more dynamics into our processes. Why on earth should everything we do circulate around the fiscal year of January to December? You know, it's meaningless in many cases. So where it's possible, where it makes sense, we need to organize our processes more on a business-driven rhythm, event-driven rhythm, and less on a calendar-driven rhythm. And last but not least, when we shall evaluate performance, that has to be something more than comparing two numbers and conclude. We need a richer, broader, more holistic concept for evaluating performance, and I'll come back to what that means in practice. And this was a crash course in Beyond Budgeting. This is what Beyond Budgeting is about, or business agility or whatever. It's quite a misleading name, but because, as you will understand, this is about much more. It's about addressing both leadership and management processes in a consistent way so that we can become more agile and also more human. Not necessarily as a goal in itself, but this is what it takes to do well in today's business and people realities. A number of companies is today on this journey in some form or shape. And here is an overview of some of them. And I could have talked for the rest of the day and tomorrow about fantastic management innovation taking place in many of these organizations. We don't have the time, so I will limit myself to two companies. Let's start in Norway. On the left-hand side, in the middle, you find a company called Miles, IT company, business in Norway and in India. Miles have no budgets, no targets, hardly no nothing, just a lot of great performance. Their most important process is recruitment. Very simple philosophy. If we get it right at recruitment, everything else follows. So when they recruit, they never take less than 10 references. When management interviews, the whole interview is about the candidate's beliefs and values and attitudes. They don't talk IT at all. They leave testing of IT skills to IT people, skilled IT people already on board. They can test for the IT competence. And by the way, if they say no, it's a no. They have a veto right. It doesn't matter what management is saying. If you work for Miles, then of course your PC is important, and it's important to maintain your competence, develop your competence. A Miles employee can buy whatever PC he or she wants, as often as they want, as expensive as they want. No PC budget. They can attend whatever course, seminar, conference they want, wherever in the world, as often as they want. The only thing Miles require is that when they have bought that PC, returned from that conference, they need to put onto the intranet what they did and the cost of it. Transparency as their control mechanism. They are very happy with this. Just one small concern. It's not a big concern. One small concern. Could it be too effective? Are people buying good enough PCs? Are they taking enough training? But isn't that a luxury problem? To encourage people to buy more expensive PCs, take more training, instead of banging them on the head with the PC budget and training budget, travel budget, and say no, no, no. Amazing company. Anyway, the veteran here within the Beyond Budgeting movement is the company you find on top in the middle. It's a Swedish bank called Handelsbanken that today have 800 branches across Europe. It's the fastest growing bank in the UK. This bank dropped traditional budgets and a lot of other stuff already back in 1970. Not as a goal in itself, but moves in order to become more agile, more human. So the bank has no budgets, no targets, they hardly make any forecast, extremely simple management model. And it's interesting to then look at the performance of this bank, since they have been sticking to this very different way of managing compared to other banks for such a long period. So let's look at some performance facts. Handelsbanken has been performing better in financial terms than their competitors, than the average of their competitors, every single year since 1972. It's the most cost-effective universal bank in Europe, and they have never needed a bailout from the authorities because they messed it up. It can't be a coincidence. Radically different management model, fantastic performance over such a long period. I don't have time to go in detail, but league tables, benchmarking is a big part of the model, comparing branches, and using that not just to stimulate branches at the bottom to kind of try to move up, but also stimulate learning, to get those down here to learn from the guys up here. And one move they have done in order to make sure that learning takes place is to say no individual bonus. All bonus in that company is common, driven by how is Handelsbanken doing versus other banks. Right? So everybody has a reason to help somebody that are struggling. And by the way, that common bonus, it's the same amount to everybody. So the CEO has the lowest percentage bonus. You don't get the money every year. They don't want anything that smells of short-term carrots. You get it when you retire or when you're 60. So if you've been with the bank since this was introduced in the late or mid-70s, there would be a balance of roughly 1.5 million euros waiting for you on top of your pension. Amazing bank. Handelsbanken and some other banks inspired what became known as beyond budgeting. And I want to share with you the beyond budgeting principles before we move to Statoil, and they look like this. I will not go through this in detail, we don't have the time, but as you can see, we are addressing both leadership and management processes. On the leadership side, I have already talked about some of the issues: purpose, values, autonomy, and so on, transparency. And if you look to the right-hand side here, this is an attempt to give advice on basically everything that a CEO or a CFO needs to think about when it comes to managing an organization, the rhythm of the process, how you set targets, how you forecast, how you allocate resources, how you evaluate performance, how you reward performance. These principles are just that. Those are principles. They provide guiding. This is not a management recipe, right? I don't like management recipes, and there's a lot of them out there. In a management recipe, somebody has done all the thinking for you. Your only job is to read the books, hire the consultants, tick the boxes. I find that quite boring and also quite dangerous. So if you like to think for yourself, there's a lot of great experiences in implementing beyond budgeting. This is also an attempt to create that coherence, consistency between what we preach on the left-hand side, what we practice on the right-hand side. Two classical examples of the opposite. It doesn't help that we on the left-hand side talk loud and warm about how fantastic people we have on board, and we would be nothing without you, and we trust you so much, but not that much. Principle 11, resource allocation. Kicking out the travel budget, are you crazy? Right? One message on the left-hand side, another message on the right-hand side. Guess which one is strongest? Another example, it doesn't help that we talk equally loud and warm on the left-hand side about we and us and together and team and everybody in the same boat. Hooray. If everything we do on incentives, principle 12 is around individual bonus. Right or wrong, but there is a poisonous gap between what we preach and what we practice. Very dangerous. All right, let us move to Statoil. And let us move to our management model, which we call ambition to action, which is basically a kind of hybrid between the so-called balanced scorecard and beyond budgeting. I have a very ambivalent view on the balanced scorecard because too often that is used to reinforce traditional management, centralized command and control, micromanagement. We are trying to do this in a different way. Three purposes: translating strategy, securing this, agility, flexibility, and last but not least, to activate important words in this book. There are some steps in this process that do not appear very unique as you see them here, but the way we do this is quite special compared to many organizations. We start with translating strategy into strategic objectives. So what does success look like on a medium-term time horizon? Then something new from next year, we have integrated risk management into this. We have always been good on risk management, but it's been very separate from business management. Now it's coming together. So what are the risks involved here? Then we are trying to identify actions that can take us towards those objectives or address risk or do both. Very often it's overlapping. And then indicators. And note we have called them indicators and not KPIs. I'll come back to why. Trying to measure that we are moving towards those objectives. The only problem with the measurement is that measurement alone moves nothing. Nothing happens just because we measure. You don't lose weight simply by weighing yourself. I know, because I've tried. It was not a big success. And then my wife, she told me that, Bjarte, maybe you didn't stand there long enough. Well, that would have been some kind of action, but the point is that nothing happens unless we do something. That's why we call it ambition to action. And last but not least, what does this mean for you and me and the teams we are in? And here is an example of activating important words in this book. The very first words in the starter book, the way we deliver is as important as what we deliver. And with the way we deliver, we talk about the values in this book, and the weighting between the two in all consequences for your career, merit pay adjustments, individual bonus if you're on that, is 50-50. What you see here is an integrated performance. We don't call it a performance management process. We talk about this as our performance framework, and it runs seamlessly from strategy via finance into HR. We have worked very closely together to make this a seamless, integrated process. Here is an example of this is actually before risk is integrated, because that's happening right now. But these are the three first elements in the process on the previous slide, and then the HR process is coming down next to it. And for those familiar with the balanced scorecard, you can see that we have been inspired by that in the perspectives that we have defined. Today we have around 800 of these in the organization, and I want to use a little bit of time on this slide to share with you two other areas where we try to be different. The first has to do with alignment. How do you create alignment throughout these 800? It can't be an anarchy. Well, there is an easy way, which is the wrong way. That's called cascading. Sitting on corporate level, simply instructing all the way down, these are your objectives, these are your KPIs, these are your KPI targets, and so on. You can get wonderful alignment. We finance people tend to love it. We can add up all the local targets here, and it matches the corporate target, and we sleep well at night. Right? We are going to deliver. It all hangs together down to the last penny. I wish it was that simple. Because in our culture, that top-down cascading very easily destroys everything around involvement, commitment, motivation. And then alignment and the numbers adding up doesn't have much value. So what we do instead is something we call translation. And this is more than playing with words. Translations mean that if you have a team here out in the middle, when that team shall make their own ambition to action, they will look around, one level up, further up, maybe all the way to corporate, left and right. And then that team will have a deep and good discussion. What does our ambition to action need to look like to support those we have a relation to when it comes to ambition levels, when it comes to direction? If that translation should go wrong for some reason, which is not a problem, by the way, I'll come back to why, then of course the level above should do what they are paid for. But one reason it's not a problem is transparency, because all of these are open, accessible for all employees. There's no place to hide with this stupid ambition to action. So transparency as a control mechanism and a learning mechanism. The other area I want to share with you has to do with time. We used to have annual versions of ambition to action. So every year, these teams made a new one for next year, or every autumn they made a new one for next year. It wasn't a budget process because we skipped budgeting, but it was still an annual process. That is now gone. This is now a continuous, dynamic process where these teams now, in principle, can change, or they can change whatever they want on their own ambition to action whenever they want. They can change strategic objectives, a strategy change. They can change KPIs, indicators, if these objectives are changed, or if they simply find a better KPI. They can even change their KPI targets if these targets have lost their meaning, impossible to achieve, or piece of cake. But it's not an anarchy. We have a very simple control mechanism. If you want to change something that's big, you still need to seek approval one level up. It's not a bureaucracy, no signatures, no stamps, but you need to talk to someone. If it's a small change, you simply inform to the same level at a suitable time. Big or small, always make sure that you inform other units affected by your changes. And that's the coordination part of this. Targets. Why should all targets have a deadline end of December? It's meaningless. So we want to have more natural time horizons on goals and targets. If there's urgency, put 3 months. If it's more complex, put 18 months. We haven't banned end of December targets, but it should be more the exception than the rule. And by the way, on targets, we have just now opened another discussion, and that is about not kicking out targets, but setting much, much fewer of them. Because target setting is difficult. It is very hard setting an annual target, trying to describe what does good performance look like 12 months down the road. It's almost guessing with all the uncertainty. It's much easier afterwards. When you know what happened, use hindsight insights to look at measured performance and have a view on was this good or bad performance. So that is a new discussion that we just have started. So, dynamic, and back to self-regulating, we want this process to be as self-regulating as possible. The more this can run by itself, the better. Right? The more these teams perceive this as a good way to manage themselves and help themselves, the better. We don't want this to be seen as the corporate big control system. But because of transparency, we have access to all the information we need from corporate. We can kind of dig into that when we need it, but we shall be very careful with kind of intervening too much. We shouldn't abdicate. We shall support when needed, and of course intervene when needed, but the more self-regulating, the better. So let me then move to what we call a holistic performance evaluation. And holistic here means 2 things. First of all, the 50-50 between the what and the how. And it also means that when we shall evaluate what we have delivered, which is defined by ambition to action, directly or indirectly, then that cannot be an exercise of adding together the number of red and green KPIs and then conclude. Because if we are dumbing down something important to something like that, the only qualifications our managers would need would be 2 things. They must be able to count, and they can't be colorblind. And I think we should have somewhat higher expectations to our managers. So we might start with counting and looking at KPI colors, but we can't end there because the I in KPI stands for indicator, right? These are simply providing indications, but they are not necessarily telling the full truth. There is a reason why these are not called KPTs, key performance truth. They are called key performance indicators, right? So we can't base our entire management on indicators. They can help us, but there must be something more. Albert Einstein, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So measurement can be a good servant in your model, but as a master, it can be a disaster, and we've seen some examples. So what we do is that before we conclude, we pressure test what we have measured through some simple questions. I see that your KPI is green, but if I look behind the numbers, have we really moved towards those objectives? How ambitious were those targets? If you have a team here that really stretched themselves, set themselves an ambitious target and didn't completely make it, well, there might be a yellow, red KPI. Then you have the team over here, lowballing, gaming, oh, it's so difficult, getting away with a lower target, performance here, wow, green KPI. Take away those targets. Which team performed best? Should we punish this team because they stretched and didn't completely make it? Of course we shouldn't. We need to create comfort and fairness in the evaluation. Has there been significant headwind, tailwind that we should take into account? Was there an earthquake in Japan making things more difficult? Was there a competitor going bankrupt, making that target a piece of cake? Right? Which risks were taken, and also how sustainable is this? So it is about applying common sense, hindsight insights, and to assess before we conclude. And we can use some of the same questions when it comes to behavior goals. And it's only when we have been through that we can have a view on performance. And here is another change. You can see that on this slide, there is a 1 to 5 rating scale. This slide is not updated because 3 weeks ago we decided to abolish performance rating, like a number of companies are doing these days. I'm very happy because I never liked it, but it's gone. But we will still be able to connect the outcomes here of that evaluation to development plans for employees and rewards, but less kind of mechanical than what it used to be. We also announced other changes in our HR process called People at Statoil. The annual performance review is gone. It's going to be much more continuous. There are no deadlines anymore. It will be more forward-looking, development-oriented, and it will be about building on people's strengths. Stop fixing people. Right? Everybody is good at something. Build on that instead of doing the opposite. So, and again, here is another example where finance and HR has worked very closely together to make this a much more dynamic, continuous, and transparent process. Goals and targets can be set at any time, changed at any time. So, yeah, good news. All right. This is what I wanted to share with you. If anybody wants to contact me later on, these are my coordinates. If anybody is even more interested, there is something called the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, which is a network of companies globally interested in this stuff. So check out the website. There's a lot of interesting stuff also for the HR community. And finally, what you just heard was the very short version, 45 minutes. The long version look like this. I wrote a book called Implementing Beyond Budgeting 7-8 years ago, and so much has happened since then. So I've just finished a very revised second edition. It's an easy read. I've been trying to write the book that I wanted to read myself. So it's not very academic, but this is the story from the trenches of working with performance. Thank you very much.